Welcome, everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past shows are available in podcast form. You can download them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Hit us up at DJ@ArtistFirst.com. Now here they are, your co-hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Yep, Michael and Margaret Lyons. Scott, you almost made me choke.
I had to pick some email to send it to, right?
Yeah. But somewhere, just send it. Don't worry about where. Anyway, sorry, folks. Welcome to the Soul of the Everyman, where the points do not matter. And our watchword for the evening. Actually, I'm sorry. And I'm here, and
so am I.
And so, Margaret, this is just starting out so smoothly. But our watchword for the evening is that so?
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have to explain that.
Indeed.
I'll preface and then you take over, because this is it's your topic and it's a good one. And all right, so let's bring this all back. Okay,
all
so
right.
Welcome to the Soul of the Everyman. And tonight we're going to talk about. We've spoken sometimes in the past about Zen koans. Now, a koan is best described as a phrase, a simple phrase usually, that takes you out of thought and makes your mind at least stop for a second. It's one is the sound of one hand clapping, and it lets you be in consciousness for that moment. And koans are very prevalent within Zen. We have a sort of a story that's attached to this particular koan, but the koan itself is that so? And it sounds very simple and almost like a phrase that you may have heard somebody say, on a game show or something. But in this case, it's the manner in which you use it. Maybe that's the best preface.
Right. I guess we want me to talk about the story, or?
Well, I think as you wish. Certainly the story is a good one, and it seems it's a famous one. But I think we can jump off from there, perhaps into how it's used.
Okay. Well, the whole idea of the Zen is to be able to hold your consciousness away from your emotions and your thoughts and any kind of body impulse. And you're observing this. And many times it's very difficult to do because circumstances of every day are driven by, if not your ego, someone else's ego, normally. And I think I said this to you before. Sometimes I think the ego is the self-defense mechanism for the body. It comes up to reclaim boundaries. But when circumstances happen, each person has their own feelings or thoughts or responses to it. And the idea is to observe only. And this koan is an extreme telling of just observe, because most of us won't do that. The Zen Master, I think he said it was back in the 1700s?
16th or 17th century. I think it was late 16th, early 17th century. In Japan.
In Japan, right. And he was renowned as a Zen teacher. And in the same town, a young Japanese girl, to her parents' dismay, was discovered to be pregnant. So they badgered her on who the father was, and she said it was Master Hakuin. So the parents came to him and accused him of getting their daughter pregnant. And his response was, "Is that so?" And that was the only thing he would say. "Is that so?" And there was no denial, and there was no admittance, and there was no emotional response, or it's just, "Is that so?" So as time went on, his reputation was tarnished, and he lost some of his students, and it continued that way. People were whispering behind their hands, oh, he's not such a righteous man.
Mm.
So when the child finally came to this world, the parents of the girl had brought the infant to him, Master Hakuin, and said, "This is your problem. This is not our problem. We do not accept this child. This is your child," and gave the baby to him. And his response was, "Is that so?" And since he was given this little one, he just said, "Okay, well, you obviously need to be cared for."
Mm.
And that is exactly what he did. He found someone who was able to supply him with milk and food and whatever else was needed back then. After a year of this, the girl confessed to her parents, "He's not the father. It is a fisherman in the village that's the father." So they were mortified, and they had gone back to the Zen Master and apologized and said, "We are so sorry. This is not your child. Let us take him from you."
Mm.
And they wanted the child back. "This is not your child." Again, his response is that so? And continued.
Mm.
It's like he gave the child to
Back.
Yeah, and that is an extreme situation where, to the Zen Master, it didn't matter that these things really had happened. His reputation was ruined. That didn't matter. Now his reputation will be brought back up because he's followed through on this, but it still didn't matter.
Right.
The only thing that mattered was, in the moment, this is what needs to be done.
Right. That now, and I think you said it. Under similar circumstances, if somebody comes to you and accuses you, in essence, of, having extramarital affair with their young daughter, and you're obviously an elder man and perhaps somebody who has a reputation, first of all, your ego wants to react with anger. Your mind wants to deny things and justify things and say, "Prove it," and so your instant engagement in the in sort of combating the accusation puts you all off center. It puts you into the mode of, "I'm right and they're wrong." My ego gets fed. My ego gets better. It gets bigger. I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to destroy the reputation of this girl. All these things.
Yeah, and it was, "This is not right. This is unfounded,"
Mm-hmm.
or "This is hearsay."
Mm-hmm.
And
unjustly accused, the worst type of accusation.
Right, but even that doesn't matter.
Right.
It's not, what is true, and this is what is being perceived by other people. But you yourself understand that my world, all is right. This is wrong, but there was no need to explain that at all.
Well, and the interesting thing about that language, again, we always find language in forms. So "is that so" is another way of saying is that true? And it's couched in the form of a question. It's not, as you said, it's not a denial. It's not an explanation. It's not anything. It's really a question, like a koan is always usually a question. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The question back to the parents was, is that true? And it's asked in the gentlest of way. It isn't even saying that's a lie. It's saying, is that so? Is that what really is?
Is that so? Is it points back to you to evaluate what is this filter that you're seeing it all in, because the filter that you're seeing it all in is dictating a story.
Exactly.
So you're coming back to, how are you telling this story according to the facts that you have? And are there facts? What is, because it's multi-layer, especially when you're talking about human beings, multi-layer, there's a lot of emotion. And again, whose egos are involved in this?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think people understand that in an Asian culture back in the 17th century, females were not looked on as an independent daughter kind of thing. You were a commodity. You were to be married off to another family for status reasons. Pregnancy meant that you are violated. You are damaged goods.
Unmarriageable. Right.
And the dishonor that was brought to the family. So the parents are absolutely beside themselves, because suddenly now their whole status is now brought down, and they want to blame somebody. Right. Now, it's a familiar situation when you know there's people who are basically screaming about a situation, and they want to blame someone. And it seems to be the bottom line of most dramas that happen in people's lives. They want to blame someone. And it's interesting because "is that so" brings it right back to you.
Right. It's a beautiful way of piercing through the story you're telling yourself. So when Hakuin is teaching by saying this to them, it's a question to them, but it's really saying to them, ask yourself, is that so? Because it tears apart this veil, the veil of, the parents' outrage, and the search for, someone must be guilty. Our daughter could never have done this to us. It must have been forced upon her. It's a whole story, whatever it is. It's a drama.
Right, whatever the story that got concocted.
Right. And then the next story, this child is born. We reject this child. He's not part of us. This is a child of the Zen Master. He has to be responsible, and he has to take this child, and we will reject and disown. All these stories are pierced, and we can just look to ourselves in the modern day. The story that you tell yourself about the guy who cut you off in traffic is pierced immediately by just saying to yourself the simple phrase, is that so? And what you see immediately is that it is a story because it's based on sometimes no facts, or just on an event or an emotion. You feel angry, and so you make up a whole story about this person's parentage and their level of intelligence, and whether or not they got their license out of a Cracker Jack box. You go through the whole thing, down to the ends of the earth, disparaging their parents, and down to the nth generation. And yet, whatever. But the point being is that so, as you said very rightly, puts it right back on you. are you making a story up? Is it so?
It's what are you telling yourself?
Hmm.
And I think when you look at it in that form, what are you telling yourself? It's a wake up call. Like, wait a minute, what am I telling myself? What do I actually? If you have any kind of presence, grounded in the moment, you realize, okay, what is that? That's being told to me, or am I telling me? Because it's through your perceptions. This is the prime way you really get to know your mind, yourself. What is the pattern that I look through? It's like, what shade of sunglass am I putting on my face to look at the light that I'm seeing? Because it's coloring the pure white light, the pure truth. I'm seeing it through a filter.
Right.
What filter is this? What am I screening out? What have I not acknowledged? And is this what I want? Because when you find the truth out, usually you sit there and you go, well, I didn't see that. Do you actually admit to it? Because there's a lot of people who will not admit to the fact that they didn't see stuff.
Well, there you go. I mean, Margaret, that's really the crux of it. Is that so? Requires you to at least be honest with one person. You have to be honest with yourself. And then, you're right, then there's the embarrassment, as we see in the story, and we can see it in everyday real life, of having to admit that you're wrong. There's a certain, you can admit it, people admit these things much more easily to themselves. Oh, well, I was wrong, but I just thought this. There's a lot of excuses that then go on, but that's engaging too. The koan, the is that so, is asked in the gentlest, non-judgmental manner. It's not, you're wrong, which is judgment. It's, is that so? And it's something you can say to yourself. It can be developed into a sort of a reflex of when you realize that you're in or entering into a story. So the sequence of events is interesting because something happens. In this case, with Hakuin, it was accused. So you're accused of something. Why did you break whatever it is, this glass? And our immediate visceral reaction is to engage the emotions and the mind. The mind is, I wasn't even home, and the emotions are, well, who are you to, let's go, let's fight about it. Or you might have, be in fear, you might be in anger, you might be in all these different emotions, and they combine to steal the moment and to create a story. You're always accusing me of this, and then you go down the path, and you're literally, both of you or all of you that are in this situation are all running down the path with your own story, competing stories, if you will. And reflexively, if you say to yourself, in the moment of accusation, when all these things leap to mind and all these emotions start to grow within your body, is that so? And you have that moment. It is a short moment, and it gets, let's say, easier to be reflexive and in that moment and draw back as you practice it. But it's easy to say. It's very difficult to do.
Right. The habit form. It basically allows you to really get to know your own habit form. Because most of us make these responses early in life. Your programming is set in, and then you just think, oh, it's perfectly natural. But to be aware that this is the programming that's been set before you, and a lot of it is whatever your experiences were when you were young, your family response. How much ego investment did your family teach you?
Right.
Do you have to stand there and say, well, I'm right and you're wrong, and you have to fight to the bitter end to prove that you're right? Or is there an ease and a space to this? Or are your values only dictated to you by not just your family, but the culture that they're in? Is it just like we saw with the Japanese family? They were so upset that this dishonor had happened in their family that they wanted to blame all the shame on someone else. And as long as it's somewhat viable, they're trying to save what piece of honor or face they have. And so the blame game starts. It's almost as if in the back of the head of the human mind, as long as you can find someone to blame it off on, it's okay.
Well, then you're a victim.
And you sit there and you go, no one is taking responsibility then. You're just sort of spreading it across the board.
It's very interesting, just to digress for a second, that the status of victim is almost, it wasn't my fault, it happened, and I did, you can claim that it was all the other person's fault. That's kind of the thrust of these emotions and these mental machinations, is to deflect all responsibility or any taint of shame from you, from your persona. But you have to say to yourself, without saying, you say, why? Why must I not bear any shame or guilt? Because internally, you feel a judgment. You feel less than. You feel, as the family, the Japanese family, felt dishonored by their culture, and in essence put into a lower status, into those who are not perfect. And it's a unattainable standard. Yet there's another story, the cultural story, that everyone is the perfect daughter and everyone is the perfect husband and the perfect wife, and that only the bad things only happen to bad people. That story. And if you being a perfectly wonderful, perfect person are a victim, you're still perfectly wonderful and perfect, because all the evil, all the bad is on the other, who maliciously and with evil intent did this to my perfect daughter, and now we have to put all the shame and bad onto them. So it's a way of cleansing oneself, pushing any judgment away. But yet, again, is that so pierces that one too.
Right.
It pierces these cultural shame icons. Look at Hakuin. I'm sure I'm saying his name wrong, but look at Hakuin. He is given, in essence, a huge amount of shame, and his reputation is damaged, and he's just to himself. He said it out loud to them, but he said it probably to himself as a reflexive way. Is that so? I know it's not so. I don't need to tell anybody it's not so, because in myself I hold what is so, and I know that this child and I never had any contact whatsoever, or if it was perfectly innocent. And the shame is completely obliterated by that, because you don't accept it. You say, is that so? I know it's not so. So you become inviolate at that level of your persona. You become inviolate because the consciousness says, that which is I had nothing to do with it. And so, is it so? No. Do I need to tell anybody? No. You don't need to do anything. So it's both a shield and a weapon, in essence.
Right, and it's a very I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you observe this, most people, if it's an accusation that is so unjust.
Hmm.
You want people to be able to say, no, that's not true.
You want to be defended, in essence, by others.
Well, just to be for yourself to say that. But the extreme part of this is that it doesn't matter to him in the least.
Exactly.
And you sit there and go, well, how can that be? You could see if it was, he did transgress in some way, but he didn't. He's perfectly innocent, and he was doing exactly what his philosophy and his discipline was dictating to him. And so something comes in that says that you're wrong. You've done this, and is that so? Not engaging in the ego. Maybe that's the best phrase I can use. Because in the Western world, you're supposed to engage in your ego continually.
Right.
And then and they always say, well, if it's true, then it'll bear out. But you should say something. You are perfectly right. And it's like, well, I guess the question internally is it really worth my life's breath to take the word my breath to deny this accusation, and then bring my level of consciousness down to just ego?
Right, because it's exactly that, Margaret. Is that the accusation is an ego accusation, and therefore to defend it is to engage in and to feed the only what's your defense? You're wrong. I'm right. All ego, all mind, all emotion. What we should probably transition a little bit off to is I liked the fact that we were talking. This also relates back to Tolle, and Tolle himself had this lovely story, similar in some ways to Hakuin's, but very different in the particulars. And maybe I'll tell that one. In essence, he was a young man at the time, and he was not his famous Eckhart Tolle, world famous Eckhart Tolle. He was living in an apartment, and he had enough space where he wanted to have a renter. He advertised, and somebody came in and said they would take the room. And this happened to be a woman, and the woman, in dealing with Eckhart, felt a little strange because, as we all know, Tolle is in presence, and his mannerisms. If you speak to him for any length of time, you begin to feel that there's something different about him. So she felt that this gentle, innocent little man was some sort of serial killer who was going to take her life in the middle of the night. So she takes the apartment. She gives him her first month's rent. She stays over one night. In the morning, she comes down and she says, "This man's going to kill me in the middle of the night. I have to tell him I can't take the room." So she says to him, I know I said I would take the room, but I don't want it. Can I have my money back?" And he just says, "Of course you can." And he gives her back the money. And she's completely flummoxed because he doesn't rage. She's expecting him to blow up and to rage and to talk about, I already let the apartment, and now I'm losing a month's rent, and how could you do this to me, and all the things that we might say in that situation. And he just says, "Okay, that's no problem. I'll just advertise for the apartment, and you can stay until somebody else comes, and off we go." And she sleeps another night, and she wakes up in the morning and says, "How can I do this to this lovely man? I'll take the apartment." And of course, she comes down and says, "I'll take the apartment." And he says, "Well, I've already, put out an advertisement, but that's fine. I don't mind. I'll just take down the advertisement, and I'll take your money, and you can have the apartment." And the whole thing was an example of, is that so? The ego would like to say that you're here, you are, you're this way, you're that way. Are you coming? Are you going? Are you giving the money? Are you taking it? What kind of crazy person are you? And attack and then be attacked and go back and forth and tell this whole story. And at the end of the day, he didn't feed into any of that.
Right. He was observing. And it was only after the second night, well, actually after he got to know her a little better, that's when
Right.
she said to him, well, I don't know, this is a new experience, and I didn't know exactly what to expect. And that first night I thought that maybe you would come up and murder me in my sleep because you're so so different from anyone I've ever experienced. And that kind of presence, I mean, it does go back to, I believe Tolle also put in his book, I think The New Earth, that talk about the Zen Master.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding that, is that so, is bringing you right back to the presence of the moment.
Mm.
And he understood there was some sort of story going on, but didn't feel that it was necessary to get more than that. Like, I'm not going to engage in any kind of ego thing. It'll work itself out.
You know, the word that people use, the ego engagement word is well, there are a couple, but one of them is, the big one is why? Why are you doing this to me? Is a big ego engagement phrase. And the other one is this idea of I'm right and you're wrong. This story that somehow this person is coming into your home to injure you intentionally. You know, this idea of assigning blame goes both ways. The parents of the girl wanted to come into the Zen master's presence and assign blame. When someone comes to you and says, I'm taking my rent away and I'm leaving and I don't want to have the room anymore, you want to immediately say to them, you are doing this to me on purpose. You know, and that's that whole ego thinking it's the center of the universe, that everybody's actions are concerned with it and with either hurting it or helping it or talking about it. You know, people have a fantasy that everyone in the room is talking about them. You know, you see somebody whispering in the corner, oh, they must be talking about me. That's the is that so? Pierces that. You look at these two people talking in the corner of the room and you say to yourself, you know, are they talking about me? And is that so? No, of course not. First of all, you have no idea. And so don't engage. Don't tell yourself the story. Like, didn't you have that experience, Margaret, where you were in the lab and you were laughing with your friends, and the girl from across the room comes storming over and says, you're talking about me, aren't you? I know you are.
Well, no, not quite like that.
Not quite like that.
Not quite like that, but it was a similar experience where we were just laughing over something silly in the lab. Mm-hmm. And she thought that we were laughing at her for some reason. And when she discovered that that was not so,
right,
she was mortified. But what I'd like to point out is, can you put a name to the glasses that were put over the sight at that moment, observing it? Can you put a name to it?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Put a name to it. Well, beyond ego, I wouldn't know another name. You really think that somebody is talking about you. You know, you have this importance. You know, this I'm important to everyone kind of glasses on.
It's fear.
Oh, all right. They are. It is fear that someone's talking about you, sure, or that I'm being denigrated, somehow being laughed at. Yes, that's true.
It's fear. All of this, when you realize that all this drama starts because of fear. You're afraid that something is happening, something bad is going to be happening to you.
I like that, yes.
So
I like that a lot.
Yes. So if you remove the fear glasses, You don't look at everything in your life around you through fear or caution, or I'm just being what's the phrase that they use?
Prepared.
Or those that worry all the time.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm just. Yeah, it is worry, but it's this kind of endless overthinking. Let me stop and overthink this. But I like the fear thing, because fear is a very interesting emotion. It's interesting from a couple of different ways. One thing about fear is it is almost always present before you realize it. Because fear, at a basic level, is a survival instinct emotion, or a survival instinct reflex.
Right.
You startle, which is the very first part of fear. You're startled. You draw back reflexively. Even before you think about it, your body's moving backward from something which is a threat. Then the emotions engage. The fear rises. You feel your body react. And then the very next second, the very next instant in fear is anger. So you're already through startle, fear, anger. Your body's now prepared to fight or flight. And then the story starts. What scared me? Why are they talking about me? I'll get angry. I'll show them. All this whole story on top of the initial trigger, on top of the welling up of emotion. The mind sits there and goes, we got to justify this. They must be doing something to us, or they must be talking about us, or we must have to go and fight them, or we've got to run away from them. All this story time sits on top of all that welling up of emotion and reaction.
I think it also comes down to is how well do you actually know yourself? Because if you have very strong ego, and you are well acquainted with all your gifts and all your faults, and then something arises, to be in that balance point, because your perceptions are not, you're not getting a full picture.
Right.
So to train oneself to say, is that so? You are allowing space for the full picture to be taken in, and not taking an accusation to heart. In other words, you receive that accusation and give it, and you validate it. When you receive the accusation, you begin to feed the egos of those that are involved when you take in the accusation. So it is making space for a fuller viewpoint.
Yeah.
And understanding that, is that so, begins to train you in the ability to change your perspectives, your personal perspective, the other people, where they happen to be coming from, how this all kind of unfolded, what were you can observe it without becoming involved.
Exactly. And I love that the changing of perspective. You're training with, is that so? You're saying to yourself, ego, do you have the full picture here? Is that so? And it occurred to me when you were saying that, I'll just say it now and see if you agree. It's sort of like what you get at the point of life review. Because in the life review, you get the God's eye view. You get the actual story of the person you thought was laughing at you, who actually was completely unconcerned about you, or that you did something against, who didn't deserve any of the accusation or any of the emotion that you threw at this person. The the ability to start to change your perspective from this very narrow I-centered, it's all about, because the ego is, it's all about me, sung in the key of me, to something a little beyond oneself, into consciousness, certainly, but then even into the other. You say, let me look at this with the eyes of the other and see from their point of view why, perhaps, or is that so? You can even share it amongst, you can look to the other and say, is that so? And use it as a word, or as a phrase rather, that you can share. If you say to the other, let's say in the beginning, before any emotion arises, you say, if I say to you, is that so? I want us both to just take a breath and say nothing for that moment, and then come back to it. Because that will be our phrase that says, before we engage, let's disengage. Let's stop the storytelling. Ask ourselves, is that so? And then you can trade that back and forth. It can become a way of diffusing a situation with someone you love, who perhaps through whatever relationship you have, it becomes contentious over little things, over nothing things. Well, this can be a phrase that allows you to negotiate and not hurt one another.
Well, when you begin to shift perspectives, just as you can see a person looking through the eyes of fear, and it appears a certain way, if you can take that off and put on the eyes of compassion,
yes,
that's the only way you can actually change your perspective to see through the eyes of another. It can't be done through the eyes of sympathy.
You should explain that a little bit, because those two things get confused all the time.
Oh, you poor person, yeah. Yeah, it's all surface level. Really, frankly, you just don't care enough to make space for another viewpoint.
I always see sympathy as the unfortunate way of saying it is, it sucks to be you, but there's no compassion, because compassion says, I am you, and I'm willing to accept your pain as something that could be my own, and therefore to sit in compassion with another is to share their compassion. Sympathy is like, geez, that's rough. Well, I've got to go now.
Yeah.
It's not like you don't care. It's just that you don't engage. You don't become human. They don't become human to you.
Well, it's for many people, it's too scary to do that.
Yes.
It takes courage to be able to look through another's eyes.
Yes.
And it's interesting because I remember the kids on the cancer wards were, they're in the experience of the now constantly. And they learned how to adapt to all situations. They, without knowing it, many times that phrase of, is that so, entered into the situations that they were being told.
Yes.
That's so.
Yes.
So I found it amazing because the pain, the idea of dealing with pain on a very visceral level is physical pain. There's a lot of procedures that have to be done, and it involves dealing with pain. But the kids were amazing because many times they just got to a point where they just said, it's only pain.
Yes.
I'll deal with it.
That's quite a phrase.
Yes. It's only pain. I'll deal with it. This too shall pass is really what they're saying. It's like, okay, it's momentary pain. I'll get through this so that I may have in front of me what I actually wish to participate in, whether it's being with a friend or playing something, a game, or watching a movie, or this is what I really want to do. So, okay, well, you have to do that injection on me? All right, fine. Let's get it over with. It's only pain.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a different piercing in one way, because pain is a challenge to the ego all the time, because why the phrase there, the ego phrase there is why me, and the response which you learn if you have to become accustomed and then therefore deal with this sort of as chronic condition. You say, why not me? Why am I special? I'm special in many ways, but I'm not special in the way that takes the burden of existence, which here, as Buddha said, all life is suffering. The burden of existence is that there will be some pain. It may be a lot, maybe a little, maybe something that you can't deal with, maybe something that you can. But the point of being is not to avoid all pain. The point of being is to be, and pain is part of it. And you do have to say, well, why not me?
Well, the kids, at least this is what I found, is that most of them just sort of looked at it. And, no one wants to be in pain.
Mm-mm.
But again, when you're looking at situations in the cancer ward, no one wants to die either. So they understood that perspective. And if it turned out that a procedure was too much for them and it didn't seem to offer enough of saving grace for them, they would tell you. It's like, no. And at that point, that's when the family dynamic would kick in. But the ones that I saw, it was very interesting because they were so close to life and death. They understood it was their life. And they wanted to live while they still had breath in their body.
Yeah.
So they would not engage in what they would term useless arguments.
Which is, it becomes, the reality there pierces the ego too. The true I can't say that word. The true reality of being in a exigent threat, and something which is truly present, draws your presence. The truly present reality that life was so precious and so ephemeral, which we should all be aware of, but we are not. And we spend a lot of time trying to not be aware of. But these kids didn't have that luxury. It meant that they weren't going to engage in these ego games, in these story games, because it's like, that's not literally not worth my breath, not worth my time, not worth my consciousness to engage at that lower level.
Right. And because that was a teaching hospital, every month you would get a new crop of doctors coming in who want to specialize in pediatric medicine. So they're very proud that they're in one of the leading cutting-edge hospitals, and they have all these other doctors teaching them. And it was always funny because we would, as the parents, as the moms are sitting there watching this gaggle of doctors follow the head doctor. It was like a mother duck with her little ducklings following her up and down the hallways. And they would all stand there and they're listening to what he or she was saying, and they would all nod their heads at the same time. When you just observed it's just completely absurd. But they never seemed to understand that when they came into the child's room and the child is engaged in something, whether it's like watching something on the TV or listening to something, they wanted the child's attention.
Right.
I remember one time they all came in, and Chris had enough of the nonsense going on. We had a hard time, and they all came in, and they were like, this sort of false brightness was, "Hello, Christopher, how are you today?" He took one look at them. He took the TV remote and he put it up to blast.
You're not worth my time.
I would rather watch this and listen to you.
Slither. Well, Christopher was a very direct person. But in fact, the phrase could have been encapsulated with, "Is that so?" Because they were coming in with a story. They wanted to say, "Oh, we're your doctors, and let's all engage, and let's have this, and you're a little kid, and we're going to talk to you like this." And he's like, in essence, "Is that so?" Or another phrase which might be shorter and more Anglo-Saxon. But the point being is in that moment, the truth of his heart said that this wasn't worth engaging in. That ego story of, let's all talk and be happy and do. He's like, nah, I don't. Not only I'm not going to be mean to you. I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to even allow you to disturb my current moment. I'm just going to turn up the TV and not look at you. Now, one might consider it rude, but politeness is another story that we tell ourselves. Oh, you have to be nice, and you have to do this and this. Politeness is a whole set of stories that we tell ourselves, and it's not that you shouldn't be polite. It's that you shouldn't allow politeness to be the persona that wants to eat you alive, that says, "Oh, you must do this and you mustn't do that."
Well, that was the main role I felt that we mothers had in the hospital. We were the buffer between all of the machinations that were going on in the hospital between the doctors and the different levels of doctor and who's got what ego going on. You want egos, go to the doctor. Oh, Lordy. I could tell you stories about that. But he himself had just said, "No, basta. I'm doing this." And the minute he did that, they all got the message loud and clear.
Yeah.
And I felt sorry for them because they were so just like out of water, a duck out of water.
Yes, a fish out of water.
Fish out of water.
A duck out of water?
A duck out of water.
Well,
quack.
Is that so?
Is that so?
Well, you know what really is so? The reality of the so is that we've come to the end of the hour.
Yeah. Okay.
No, is that so? Yes, it is so.
Is that so?
So would you take us away?
Well, I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael, and when you're confronted with a situation, just ask them, "Is that so?"
That's so.